All right. So essentially what I need to figure out is how do I take a doodle, a sketch, and I made a photocopy. So that was my original sketch. And this is what um, I randomly did in the class. And I said, okay, so I like these glasses. And I kind of, I took I scanned it and printed it out, made it a little bigger. And so now what I need to do is make it into something that I can scan and um, bring into a CAD software, right? So it's a lot of compromises. If you notice, I kind of cropped this out eventually because I realized that frames typically need a flat area to attach to. So I made a slight compromise. I didn't have to. So that would have been what it looks like um, as you see here. Now you could argue that I didn't do a great job or I did, but so what I did then is I wanted to look at and I just picked some random pair of glasses, right? So I looked at frames that I owned and I said, all right, so what's and remember, I don't need to draw the whole thing. I just need to draw half of it. There's no sense of drawing the other half because I can very easily mirror that over. So I really am looking at half of this frame. I went from the center to the outside. These are a little wider. This is at 2 3/4, but I decided 2.5 inches would work. And then I looked at the height of this frame. These are somewhat narrow. These are actually some Ray-Bans. If you see there, some Ray-Bans. These are only 1.25 inches. I figured mine's a little bit rounder, so I decided that I was going to take this sketch and fit it into an area that is 1.5 by 1.5 inches. And then what I need to do was do obviously the frame here. And so looking at my sketch, the challenge that you have with concepts, and this is, what a designer will do, or a design assistant, for example. Think of a lot of designers at places like Nike or whatever, where the designer's coming out with a lot of sketches. Somebody's got to take that and make that a reality. So there's a lot of guesswork involved here, right? So what does that really look like? I don't know. So what I did was I interpreted it. I looked at some current frames that I had, right? Used those frames and I measured it. And so I found that the frame length on mine was, doing the same process. This was approximately, this was, using my ruler here, approximately 5 inches, maybe a little more by, total was about 1.25 inches. So I said, well, for my design, I'm going to make it 5 by 1 inch, right? So that's kind of the process. And so, the way that we go about that is not all that complicated, but this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, right? So what I need to do then is I'm going to draw a rectangle that is, taking my ruler here, 2.5 inches. So let me try to make this square for you. 2.5 inches. And you should probably use a triangle if you have one, but I'm just going to eyeball this by, I said 1.5 inches, right? So that's going to be where half of my frame, that's the space it lives in. And again, you should really do this with a triangle, 90 degrees. So I'll make a little ding here. All right. So, that's everybody's is going to be a little different. So what I recommend you do is take either your sketch, and if you don't feel comfortable with your sketch, take everybody had an activity of researching 5 frames. You can use one of those. Obviously your final is going to be your design. So the sooner you have that, the better. All right. So here's kind of the concept here. And so what I'm looking at, I think for me, it's this kind of this big wave up here that I want to do. So here's the center line, right? So that's going to be my center. And then this is where you really start designing. So what is it really going to look like? I've got this bridge here. Let me zoom in a little bit if I can. So I've got this bridge. Let me pull this over. So what does that look like? The frame's going to be in here. It's kind of, and so this is what I'm going to be replicating inside the computer. So you really want to think about what does that look like? And that's where the design really, this is where the design really happens for me. So it's going to do something like this. And I've got a really high bridge here. And it doesn't mean I can't change it later, but what you really want to do, and this is what I say, why it's so hard once you get into the computer, because these very subtle lines, you start to lose sense of proportion and scale. Once you're in the computer, it's very hard, I find, to really be true to your original concept. It gets lost very quickly. So you really want to try to keep your concept in this drawing and keep that integrity. So I'm going to come down. And again, this is where you're interpreting your 3D sketch or your rule. And so, and you want to think about, all right, so there, I can live with that. So what does that look like, the frame then? What I did find when I did this the first time was if you look at this frame is actually, when I modeled it, it's actually pretty thick. So for example, let me show you what I mean by that. So if you remember, I use this as my fusion. Let me show you what this frame ended up looking like when I brought it into the Fusion 360 software. So what that ended up looking like, and I realized it's a lot thicker than I might have wanted. So it feels kind of thick to me, but what you're seeing here, this is after I took the half of it, and we can, I'll show you how to do that in the Fusion, but it does feel kind of thick to me, this bottom of this frame. So just be aware that as you do this, that your frame can it's if you look at that, it's actually kind of thick. So, but anyway, let's go ahead, and I'm going to work with this. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you really want to think about, I mean, if it's too fuzzy and too many lines, you're going to be doing a lot of guesswork once you get into the CAD software. And I will tell you that I think that as a project goes within Fusion, this is very doable because there's really only a front and then a side view, right? And so once we build it, we just extrude it. So I think that I wouldn't get intimidated by this project because if you can do the Nike logo like we did in Illustrator, I think you could, and I'm not saying that was easy, but I think that you could certainly do this one. Just one or two additional steps, all right? So you can kind of see the process here. So I'm doing my best to keep the integrity of this design. In hindsight, maybe it's a little wider, but, just for the sake of keeping this going. So really what I've done here is, to my best ability, try to make this design a little bit more real. Now, looking at it, it does, on closer inspection, and I didn't have, the first time I did it, I didn't zoom it up, but it does feel like it might want to be a little wider, but that's the part of this process that is very helpful. And as I said, having done this once, I realized that when it gets into the software, this frame, and the reality is, if I had looked at this frame, I mean, you look how thin that is, right? And I never thought of it as being thin, but then when I looked at the one I did here, I think I have about twice the mass as this frame. So just be aware, but I want that mass on the top, maybe not so much on the bottom. Okay, so once I get the frame, I obviously, it's one piece here. I'm not worried about the glass portion of it, because when I build this, I will actually automatically build that. All right, so that'll be a separate material. I don't need to do that separately. And then what I need to do is the frame. And this project, we're let's just assume that the manufacturer that we're working with can do with a front and a side view. We're not going to make a wraparound frame. Nothing a matter of wraparound frames. It's just for this activity, I think that's a little going to be a little challenging. So we essentially want to keep it with a front and then the side. All right. And so then what I would do is I would build the frame. Here's the thing, though. So a couple things. I want to maintain. There is a little detail for me right there. And I think what that is, and I am not a eyewear designer, but it's a nice little detail. But it also, I think, is where the frame with the backside of of your frame of your glasses secures itself in there. So I would then need to think about, okay, what does it look like? What is that going to look like? So then what I did with this one is I decided that it's going to be 5 inches by, I think I said 1 inch, right? So then I would take, and I would probably you would want to scan this in separately. So I'd go, you could scan it and then in Photoshop or something, just cut it out. But you want to do these two things separately. So I said 5 inches by 1 inch is the overall area. And again, you really want to use a square. I'm kind of eyeballing this so I can do this pretty quickly here. And then I'm going to draw this frame. And I don't, again, really know what the frame is going to look like. You want to be a little sensitive to, obviously, this has to go behind the ear. The top of this is going to, do something like this. So I would just caution that you want to maintain that this has to attach. So, if I decide I was going to make my my frame, here, that would be, 1/2 inch. You have to realize, where's that going to fit on that front view here? I really only have about 1/4 inch to work with here. So that means that, and I, as I said, I'm not an eyewear designer. So I realized that because my initial sketch, if you look here, I made it kind of big because I liked that look, but it didn't fit. And that's also why I cropped this off, right? So it's inevitably design, if you're really looking to manufacture it, tends to be, there's got to be compromise along the way. So on this version, maybe I just round, right? So knowing that it's only, yes, sir, 1/4 inch.
How large is that larger square on top there?
So this one is, I made 2.5 inches, all right? The top one is 2.5, and then this one we said was going to be 5 inches. So I'll thank you. I'll put those dimensions on there for everybody. But think about, if you're designing for children, we're going to look at some ergonomic data of what the head size would be. It'd probably be a little smaller. So then this one's going to be, I said 5 inches. And there's nothing a matter. I did a whole line of furniture once, and I really wish that I had gone around and just looked at what the industry standard sizes were. It doesn't mean I didn't get there eventually, but I could have saved myself a lot of time. So this is 2.5 by 1.5 inches. Okay. And so, all right. So then this bottom was 5 inches. So then, basically it's going straight for a long time. Look at a pair of glasses until it wraps around the ear. And so there's different ways to do that. Obviously I want to make this have some stylized. If you look at, there's some of those other Ray-Bans, they have a lot of, it actually gets bigger and then it gets smaller. There's a lot you can do here. You want to start thinking about, what's comfortable here. You're not really going to see it. So I think you're probably going to want to have a soft edge of some sort. And so we can look at some existing frames. What does that look like? Does it need to be a big mass or not? So once I'm happy with the overall design, then what we want to do, and the nice thing about these frames is, believe it or not, these are really easy to make either via a 3D printer, or you can make it by a laser cutter. So I've done this on a laser cutter with taking out wood and then actually acrylic. You can do it with acrylic, and it actually works amazingly well because the lens is acrylic. Now, the only downside with what we're doing is it's going to be flat. Now, for bonus point or future exercise, we could make the frames round. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but for what we're doing now, it's essentially going to be a flat, flat front. And so once I get into the Fusion software, whatever my CAD modeler is, I would just, once I build this right side, I would then just flip it to the other side. Okay, so our so let me just kind of a little bit. So again, the reality is if it's too messy in here, when I bring it into the software, at some point, I'm only going to be using a spline, one line. So you really want to try to get it as clean as possible, just so there's no ambiguity. And then, you can change this as you go along here, right? So that is the exercise. So what you want to do to complete this exercise is you've got the front view and the side view. This is looking a little weird for me compared to the one I did earlier, but that's okay. And again, this is what you really want to spend some time being satisfied with the design, because once it's in the software, it doesn't mean you can't change it, but you're losing steps from the original. And so you want to try to replicate it the best you can at this point. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording. All right.